Hello there once again, and welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And today we're going to meet one of the newer judges on the 10th Circuit.
Yes. I started to say this is a special show for me. All our shows are special for me because I like them all and I like your guests. But this one is especially good for me because it brings to the set of The Verdict a person I've known for many, many years when he first started practicing law privately, and he's now serving honorably on the 10th Circuit, the Honorable Robert Bacharach, who worked with me for a while and then went on to be a magistrate and a circuit judge. We're going to find out about what the 10th Circuit does. We're going to find out about what the 10th Circuit judges do, and what impact it has in Oklahoma on our lives, and how Oklahomans populate the 10th Circuit Court. And we're just going to find out everything we can.
All right, well, let's get to it.
We'll get him under oath here.
We'll be right back. You're watching The Verdict.
I've always been a public servant. I've served either tribes, I've served the federal government, or I've served state governments. The law allows me to express my natural desire to advocate. My name is Stephanie Cochran. I am an attorney and I am Chickasaw. Lawyers give their clients, and in my case, tribal governments, a voice. And it's through legal decisions that tribes have been able to accomplish and to regain some much lost footing that they encountered in the late 1800s and the 1900s. When I reflect back on this time in history, I think I'll look at it in terms of opportunity. And I think now we have to turn those opportunities into long-term success for our future generations.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Matter of great personal pleasure and privilege for me to introduce the Honorable Robert Bacharach, Circuit Judge for the United States Circuit Court for the 10th Circuit here in the, well, he's of course here in Oklahoma City, but the court's based in Denver. Judge Bacharach did his undergraduate work at the University of Oklahoma, did his law work at Washington University in St. Louis, where he graduated with high honors. Following law school, Judge Bacharach went to work as a law clerk for the Honorable William Holloway, a judge on the 10th Circuit, and worked with Judge Holloway for a couple of years before joining our firm in private practice for 12 and a half years. He was with us and then got an opportunity to go back to the federal system and to go on the federal bench as a U.S. magistrate judge, which he did here in Oklahoma City. He served honorably and well here and with great reputation building in the process for approximately 13 years before he was nominated for and confirmed by the U.S. Senate, nominated by President Obama, confirmed by the U.S. Senate for service on the 10th Circuit, confirmed by a rather daunting vote of 93 in the Senate to 4-0 against. It's almost an unbelievable, in these days of no bipartisanship, it's a rather unbelievable result. But Judge Bacharach had strong support from Senators Coburn and Inhofe, and of course, obviously, the rest of the Senate. Since that time, he has been serving on the 10th Circuit and is doing so today. He was good enough to join us. He's the first judge we have had from the 10th Circuit on our show, although we've had a number of other folks from the judiciary on. And we're going to find out about the 10th Circuit. We're going to find out about Judge Bacharach. Welcome, Bob, to the show.
Well, Ken and Mayor, thank you so much for having me. This is a great honor and a true delight.
Well, I want to hear about the confirmation process. What's that like? Is that scary? Is it a breeze? What's going through your mind when you realize you're going to go through this kind of ultimate public scrutiny?
For me, it was a very surreal experience, Mayor. It was something that I had absolutely no preparation for. And just going through it, it was just a very important process, obviously, and it was something that I tried to appreciate every aspect of it. I had no expectation of getting the job, which frankly made the process even more surreal and just something that I'll always appreciate, frankly.
What are appropriate questions for someone who's being considered for that? What type of questions would you ask a person who's being considered to get into that position?
Well, Mayor, wonderful question. One of the things that I was really taken by was what was not asked of me. Senator Inhofe and Dr. Coburn, for example, never asked me my opinions about legal issues, certainly nothing about politics. They frankly never asked me my political registration. And I think every senator takes the advice and consent process so importantly and approaches it in quite different ways that I, from hearing Dr. Coburn's public comments, for example, I think he was principally interested in finding about the individual's character. When I met with Dr. Coburn, for example, one of the things that that I'll always remember is primarily what he asked me was about my family, about my mom and dad, my siblings, my wife, my little girl, and I feel that he really wanted to find out who I was, what I was. Was I someone that would reflect honorably in the judiciary? Because once someone is selected for a federal judgeship, there's no recalling that vote. There's no firing that person. It's life tenure. And other than impeachment, which happens very rarely in our history among federal judges, you're going to have that person for life, and everyone takes that very seriously and approaches it in a very different way, I think, from senator to senator. So those are my experiences with Senator Inhofe and Dr. Coburn, and they primarily wanted to find out who I was. Now, with the White House, it's a little different. The White House goes through a very intense vetting process. So I had written, I believe, close to 1,500 opinions in my tenure as a magistrate judge. And so they went through every single opinion that I wrote. They searched the internet in ways that I didn't even know was possible. I didn't think I was that interesting, that there would be anything on the internet about Bob Bacharach. But they searched intensely, and so they went through an incredibly intense vetting process. And so they asked me everything under the sun, including whether I'd gotten speeding tickets. And I've certainly got inquired about my speeding tickets, which I'm embarrassed to say.
When they interviewed me, I covered for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kent. So they asked me everything under the sun. Frankly.
Down to the speeding tickets.
Yes.
Yeah, and you say you had 1,500 opinions that you'd written. Did they draw out 2 or 3 and ask you, expound on this? What
More than 2 or 3.
Yeah.
They asked me
so you had to remember all 1,500.
Well, you certainly had to remember the ones that they asked you about. And so one of the things, they have a vetter for every federal nominee or person that is considered to be for nomination, because all this preceded the nomination process. And so they have a vetter that literally reads every single opinion, and then they call out the ones that they think could create a question. For example, every federal judge eventually gets reversed. And so they asked me about the opinions and the decisions that I made where I got reversed. One of the parts of the vetting process is each prospective nominee will meet with a deputy White House counsel, others from the White House counsel's office, from the Justice Department, and so they asked me about some of my opinions. They talked to a number of people, and of course asked me about certain aspects of my career, whether it's my opinions and reversals, and so they asked me about really quite a few of my opinions.
Talk about the confirmation hearing. I presume there was a formal hearing in front of the Senate committee that has to approve, the Judiciary Committee, I guess. Tell us about that experience.
It was an incredible experience, Kent. It was just so surreal. My wife and daughter were there in the front row with circuit nominees. Unlike district judge nominees, we have to sit there and get questions by ourselves. The district judge nominees typically will have a panel.
Oh.
And so you can sort of share the misery, share the anxiety. With circuit nominees, we don't get to do that. So we're under the gun. We don't have any idea who is going to show up. I met with Dr. Coburn beforehand because Dr. Coburn and Senator Inhofe were frankly my biggest supporters, even though I had never laid eyes on either one before I was considered for this spot. But they did. They supported me very strongly, and I met with Dr. Coburn. And Dr. Coburn, who was my greatest supporter, I noticed when he didn't volunteer, which was who's going to be in the room. So I had no idea which senators were going to be in the room. There weren't very few. I was told that that's a good sign because for controversial nominees, there will be a number of people that show up. And I thought, well, that's good. But of course, I'd never appeared in the U.S. Senate, and so I was very, very nervous. But it was just a very surreal experience.
How long did it take?
About 15 minutes, which seemed like about 15 hours.
Yeah. Kind of like 15 seconds on this show.
No, nothing like being on this show.
We're visiting with Judge Bob Bacharach. Thanks for coming on The Verdict. We'll be right back with more after this.
Thank you.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We're back on The Verdict, visiting with Circuit Judge Bob Bacharach. And Kent, where do you want to go from here?
Judge, I'm not confident that all our viewers will have a good understanding of what the 10th Circuit does, what states are involved in the 10th Circuit geographic area and the like. Can you just give us a little summary of that?
Sure. The 10th Circuit covers 6 states: Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. So any appeal from a federal district court in one of those 6 states will then go to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And then, of course, from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, it can potentially go to the United States Supreme Court.
So it's an intermediate court of appeals,
yes,
right under the Supreme Court and above the district courts.
Correct.
Let me ask a question that'll expose my ignorance on such matters. Because you're dealing with multiple states, does a knowledge of state law in each of those jurisdictions matter, or are you dealing only with federal law?
Absolutely. We have a number of cases which are called diversity cases, in which the parties are of diverse citizenship, and if the amount in controversy exceeds a threshold amount, we would be dealing specifically with that state's law. And so, unlike my prior job as a magistrate judge in the Western District of Oklahoma, we often get called upon to decide issues of New Mexico law, Kansas law, and the like, really for all of the 6 states.
So how do you do that? How do you have a knowledge base on all of those multiple states? Because they must have extreme differences in different ways of viewing things.
They absolutely do, Mayor, and so that's really a large part of the job, just like anything else, just doing legal research. And I don't purport to have a lot of knowledge about state law, or for that matter, many areas of federal law. And so one of the attributes of really any judicial spot in state law, in state court, or in federal court is simply to do the legal research and to find out, to fulfill our own gaps in knowledge.
Well, at the 10th Circuit level, you have oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you have really good lawyers on both sides of the case. And they're both vigorously asserting their positions they think are correct, or at least for all intents and purposes, they think it's correct. Those are pretty knotty problems to figure out sometimes. Do you have any clerks or anybody to help you with doing any of that?
We do. We are really blessed with a wonderful staff, each circuit judge. We have a judicial assistant, which I'm proud to say, Rosine Coleman, who has been my partner in the law for close to 20 years.
Yes.
She was my assistant, my secretary when I was with your firm, Crowe and Dunleavy, which, and then I took her with me. I stole her from Crowe and Dunleavy. I'm sorry, Kent. To take her as my judicial assistant when I was a magistrate judge, and she was kind enough to come with me as a circuit judge. And then we also have 4 wonderful young lawyers, judicial law clerks, who I'm fortunate to be able to work with, and frankly, we all operate as a team.
What's the most difficult type of case? Is there one area, for instance, if it's a technology case, is that more difficult if you don't have that specific expertise in that technology, or is it real estate? What are the hard ones?
For me, frankly, every case has its own challenges. One of the most challenging kinds of cases, not necessarily by subject matter, but by type, is when there's a party that's pro se, who...
Not represented by a counsel.
Yes, I'm sorry. And oftentimes these are not only unrepresented, but perhaps don't have a great deal of, or any formal education. Sometimes they have difficulty in writing, or it's difficult to actually read the handwriting. I've certainly had a number of those kinds of cases. And we owe it to each party to try to understand first what they're saying, and then understand the law. And if it is a sophisticated party and with sophisticated counsel, we certainly owe it to that party to treat that party fairly. But we owe absolutely the same degree of conscientiousness and in attention to their matter when it's an unrepresented, uneducated, perhaps incarcerated litigant. And so in those cases that are challenging, Mayor, because we have to not only understand what they're saying, which is sometimes difficult, and then understand the law without the benefit of advocacy, but we also have to be mindful of the fine line, which is fine, between being an advocate for a party with the greatest of intentions to try to be fair to that party, but not become that party's advocate, because we are not advocates. And that, I think, is a very challenging type of case that I still deal with as a circuit judge, certainly dealt with frequently as a magistrate judge. And with regard to subject matter, there are so many areas of the law that I don't know about that I find challenging, but that's really a great deal of the fun of my job.
Let me ask you for a couple of secrets from the court that you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But everybody that has a right they need to appeal out of a federal decision gets to go to, if they're in the 10th Circuit, gets to go to the 10th Circuit on an appeal. But not every case gets an oral argument. Some cases are decided solely on the briefs, other cases are decided on the briefs and a supplemental oral argument of each side gets 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. How does a court determine which cases are going to be granted oral argument and which ones are going to be decided solely on what's written?
Kent, one of the things that each judge does, in addition to deciding our cases, is deciding how a case gets decided. In other words, whether to decide the case on the briefs. And so each Thursday morning, tomorrow in my email, I will get an email with several cases, and the question will be basically, what do we do with these? Do we set these for oral argument? Do we set it for a decision on the briefs? Which docket? And each of my colleagues then will go about that same process. And if the parties ask for oral argument, I think there's a great predisposition to granting it. If the parties are willing to undergo the cost, the time to go to Denver, Colorado to present their oral argument, we think we owe it to those parties. In criminal matters, particularly if the defendant wants oral argument, we almost always grant oral argument. And certainly in any case.
Your court handles both civil and criminal matters.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
And in a capital case, I suppose it's self-evident. We always grant oral argument in any capital matter. And then there is also an unwritten rule in our circuit that in any case that is otherwise set for a decision on the briefs, if any one of the panel members, and typically we sit in groups of 3, any one judge wants oral argument, that judge is entitled to have oral argument. And so the rules are crafted in such a way as there is a predisposition that we err on the side of granting oral argument.
Yeah. Let me follow up with that just a minute, and don't have a lot of time, but I have been in an oral arguments where I prepared my oral argument, got up and gave it without a question being asked and sat back down. Others where I stood up, said my name, and then was peppered for the whole time period with questions from the court, and I just thrown my prepared remarks away because I had to answer what they were interested in. Do you ask a lot of questions from the bench, and what does that tell a practicing lawyer who may get up and get no questions or may get up and just get bombarded with questions?
There's really not a great deal that one can infer as a lawyer, and I know from being on the other side of that, we're trying to read the tea leaves of what the judge's questions mean, and in terms of whether you get a lot of questions, but typically, and I think I'm no different than any other judge, sometimes I ask a lot of questions and sometimes ask very few or maybe no questions. We have, just like the lawyers, generally 15 minutes, or in an en banc case 30 minutes, to decide or to ask the lawyers things that we are going to need to help us in deciding that case. And even if we know how we're going to vote, how to analyze particular areas. Because once you leave the courtroom, I also and my colleagues will lose the opportunity to solicit the help from the lawyers in answering those questions. And so we utilize the questions really to help us decide the cases.
Right. Judge Robert Bacharach, thank you so much for coming on The Verdict.
Oh, thank you.
We're out of time.
Thank you so much.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-child.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
We're back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, wrapping up a show with 10th Circuit Judge Bob Bacharach.
Yes, Judge Bacharach was kind enough, of course he lives here in Oklahoma City, but the principal location of the court is in Denver. They do sit other places by designation, but by and large they sit in Denver. We appreciate so much him giving us his time and telling us about the 10th Circuit. He's the first, in over 700 shows, he is the first 10th Circuit judge we've ever had on the show, and so I thought it was useful to tell the viewers a little bit about what the 10th Circuit does and how they're made up and where they sit and that sort of thing. But he's a grand representative from Oklahoma and from the legal community on the 10th Circuit. Just does a wonderful job.
And approved 93-0 at the U.S. Senate. That's pretty good.
He was well liked by the Senate, that's for sure.
We have some website information to give. You find more about the 10th Circuit and Judge Bacharach at a website that has a domain name of CA10, that's 10.uscourts.gov. That's CA10.uscourts.gov. And we have a website. We'd love for you to go there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a topic you'd like to see us discuss on a future edition. So please do that. Our website is theverdict.tv. That's going to do it for this week's show. We'll see you next week.